available from the Vote Office. We now come to questions to the Home Secretary. William Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 1.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I put on record my condolences for your loss. The government has implemented a number of measures to reduce net migration. This includes restricting overseas students from bringing family dependents to the UK whilst they study, stopping overseas care workers from bringing family dependents, increasing the salary threshold from skilled worker visas ultimately to 38,700, and increasing the minimum income requirements to family visas. We recognise the levels of migration have been too high, and I took action immediately upon my appointment to bring those figures down.
William Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for his answer. But one of the main drivers of immigration over the last 20 years or so has been labour shortages caused by falling birth rates. And according to projections by Philip Pilkington and Paul Morland, if birth rates don't increase, then immigration will have to rise to over a third of the population over the next 50 years if we're going to maintain a sufficient working age population. So immigration on this scale has no democratic consent, and obviously the Minister has promised repeatedly to reduce net migration. So can I ask what discussions my right honourable friend has had with colleagues in the Treasury about this issue, and does he agree that the government must have a strategy to address falling birth rates to ensure that we don't always have to rely on ever-increasing rates of immigration?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes about birth rates, and there are a myriad of social and economic factors that drive that beyond my control. I have to concede. But I have spoken with my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, about related issues, and recognising that GDP per capita is an important metric as well as overall GDP. We're ensuring that we invest in a British workforce. My right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, passionate about apprenticeships and lifelong learning. We want to be a high-skilled, high-income economy rather than a low-skilled mass migration economy. That remains the government's priority, and we are taking action in our immigration policy to reflect that desire.
Antisocial.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tehas Tekla Tesfaye is one of the elite female cyclists chosen to lead Ride London next month. She's also an asylum seeker living in a hotel in my constituency where the food is so bad it makes her sick and unable to compete. Last month, an investigation by Sustain found food for asylum seekers that was undercooked, past its sell-by date and infested with insects, have left them in some cases malnourished and hospitalised. Could the Secretary of State investigate this scandal and the responsibility of its contractor Clear Springs so asylum seekers like Tehas are not subject to such dangerous and degrading conditions?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure you, the honourable gentleman in the House, that our contractors are expected to maintain standards. Where they fall below those standards, they will be held to account, and I will absolutely take a note of the case that he has raised.
Gilly Tolhurst.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the measures my right honourable friend has taken to tackle the levels of legal migration. But could my right honourable friend inform me if what assessment he has made of the expected impact of the new immigration salary list and what that will have on the net migration figure?
Secretary.
My honourable friend is at the front line of our fight against illegal migration, but legal migration is important. We have recognised that the figures have been too high in the most recent couple of years for a number of reasons, and we have taken, as I've listed, we have taken a number of measures. The combined impact of that is that, by our estimations, 300,000 people who would have previously have been eligible under the new regime that I have put in place will no longer be eligible, and that's the order of magnitude of change that we will eventually see once these proposals are fully implemented.
Tim Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The refusal to allow care workers from overseas to bring a spouse with them comes at the same time as in Cumbria we're finding it impossible to fill at least a fifth of all the social care jobs. Would you explain to constituents of mine who are incapable or unable to find those people to care for them and their loved ones why it seems sensible to make people from overseas lives so miserable in coming over here to care for our loved ones they don't come at all?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I recognise in rural communities that recruitment and retention of staff is difficult, and in his constituency, which is a wonderful, beautiful but very rural constituency, there are particular pressures. I can assure him the global supply of potential care workers is very, very significant, and actually the issues with regard to where in the country those people work are more about the internal dynamic within the UK economy than the quantum of people around the world who would seek to work in the UK. There are plenty of people who would wish to work here, recognising that they are not allowed to bring their dependents with them. But the issue of where in the country those people work is actually a broader issue.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thurles.
The cruel Conservative hikes to the visa minimum income threshold have caused deep distress, deep distress to many. Does he understand the pain that these changes have caused? And what message does he believe it sends out to those that would do us the honour of making their home in these islands, that he puts such a high price on love and family life?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely right that any nation in the world puts conditionality on the people it accepts within its own borders. This country has a long-standing, in fact, I'm a product of this, as are my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, the Trade Secretary, and many others within the government, of a long-standing tradition in this country of being open and welcoming. However, when we see the orders of magnitude of legal migration that we've seen over the last couple of years, it is incumbent upon us to take action. We have made it clear what action we'll take. We have given notice of the changes so that people can make their plans accordingly. And when there are special cases, there is a special cases exemption so that we can both control immigration and do our moral duty to protect those people who seek our protection and be an attractive place for people to come and work.
Kim Johnson.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2020, we have supported 413 projects through our Safer Streets Fund and also the Safety of Women at Night Fund, investing over £150 million, including £3.9 million, which has been designated to Merseyside. The objective of the fund is to improve public protection, particularly that of women, particularly at night. An independent evaluation shows that it is more than achieving its objective.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, but I don't really think the Minister answered the question about the impact on the reduction. Merseyside has now received a combined reduction of £180,000 to our Safer Streets Fund in round 5. And our Police and Crime Commissioner, Emily Spurrell, has called this ill-considered and short-sighted because projects have already begun and delivery is underway, but the funding has been restricted yet again. So will the Minister agree today to reinstate the lost funding so that Merseyside Police and others can continue their great work keeping our streets safe?
Minister.
May I just gently tell the Honourable Lady that in the last round of funding, round 4, the Merseyside received £1.3 million through the Safer Streets Fund. That was quadruple what it had received in round 3. And over £1 million of this was designated specifically into CCTV and street lighting in Liverpool city centre. Round 5 should be seen in the context of record funding into the Merseyside Police, who received an unprecedented uplift of £27.6 million, a 6.5% uplift. I am confident that Merseyside will still be able to deliver its schemes, including the Safe Homes cards, providing safe transport to help women get home from night spots in this round.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Essex, the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner Roger Hurst has used the Safer Streets money to pay for CCTV and safety measures in the bunny walks, to pay for safety improvements around the Chelmsford Prison to keep residents safe, and also more recently for CCTV cameras in Central Park and the avenues and extra safety measures around the cathedral. Despite all this, the local Lib Dems want to take credit for all of Roger's work. So will the Home Secretary pop down to Chelmsford to come and see me and Roger and make sure that we say thank you to Roger for all he's done with his government money to keep people safe?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She is correct. Roger Hurst has an exceptional track record as a police and crime commissioner. He's done outstanding work driving down antisocial behaviour and domestic burglary. And the examples she gives are exactly what the Safer Streets Fund is for. Bespoke, local, dedicated services that will improve public protection. I know that the Essex Police have higher numbers than at any point in their 185-year history, and I will certainly urge the Home Secretary to pay them a visit at the next available opportunity.
Shadow Minister Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of the whole Shadow Home Affairs team, can I please place on record our sincere condolences on the loss of your father. Mr. Speaker, following the horrific killing of Kulsuma Akhtar in Bradford, who was tragically stabbed to death in broad daylight while pushing her 3-year-old son in a pram, West Yorkshire and Greater Manchester Police have referred themselves for investigation because of prior contact with Kulsuma and her husband, who has since been arrested for her murder. Cases of multiple contact with the police before violent escalation are all too common. Labour will mandate domestic abuse and wider violence against women and girls training for every police officer in the country, and we'll introduce Raneem's law to overhaul the policing response when reports are first made. So I ask the Minister, how many more women will have to die before the government can do the same?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady is right to mention the case of Kulsuma Akhtar. It is appalling what happened to her. I obviously can't comment on any specifics in relation to the case, but she will know that the bail conditions that the perpetrator had been released under contained restrictions that were breached themselves. So it was not a case of the court refusing to apply conditions, it is that he breached them. In relation to her wider point, of course, every single one of these cases is a tragedy. She will know, because we've worked on a cross-party basis in the past, how much time and attention we dedicate to this at the Home Office. But I will simply say this. We now have domestic abuse training that has been rolled out to over 80% of forces. The Home Secretary and I are working very, very closely with the 9 outstanding ones. They are on a timetable for delivery. I want to reassure her of that. And we now, this month, have specialist trained rape specialists in every single police force in England and Wales.
Tim Law.
Number 3, sir.
Minister.
Thank you. Look, I thank my right honourable friend enormously for raising this question. Let me be quite clear that the hostile activity we've seen from Chinese authorities and state-affiliated groups poses a serious threat to the security and well-being of the British people and to our partners and allies across the world. The Deputy Prime Minister came to this chamber last month to speak about the pattern of malign activity, including the targeting of our parliamentarians and 2 malicious cyber campaigns by Chinese state-affiliated actors. We must never be afraid to stand up for ourselves and to call out this kind of activity that has targeted both him and me.
Tim Law.
Mr. Speaker, can I add my personal condolences for your father's losses as well? Can I say to my right honourable friend that, of course, we had the scandal about the hacking of MPs' email accounts back in March. We subsequently learned that the FBI had informed our government about this instance 2 years ago, as well as other foreign governments who had legislators who were also affected. Why has it taken 2 years for us to be told about a serious security breach? And will he now, with his colleagues in Cabinet, make sure that China is absolutely treated as and labelled as a threat and not just an epoch-defining systemic challenge, and everything is done urgently to put China in the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme?
Minister.
My right honourable friend, who's given this House and our country exceptional service over many years and will sadly be standing down in the next election, has made, again, some very, very strong points. The first of which is that he knows the language that I use and he's heard the words that I've said. The reality is that we face threats from around the world, and many of them, sadly, are emerging out of Beijing today. We know this, we've seen it, and many of us in this House feel it. So this is not something that we're shying away from. The reality, however, is that there are many different ways of answering it. Now, he's raised a very important aspect on furs, and that's something that, of course, is being looked at. But he will have heard the words of the Deputy Prime Minister in this chamber only a few weeks ago, and how clearly he made himself heard.
Chris Brown.
I'm sorry, but I'm not convinced by the government's attitude on this. When the Deputy Prime Minister came to see us a few weeks ago, he didn't say anything new. He announced things about events that had happened 2 years ago, but the member himself knows of attempts by the Chinese government to undermine the work of the Foreign Affairs Committee of this House. Why are we only ever told about things that happened years ago? If we're surely to take these issues seriously, we have to have an up-to-date and present account of the activities of the Chinese state.
Minister.
The Right Honourable Member will know very well that when there is a reason to act quickly and to draw it to the attention of the House, we do, as is the case of Christine Lee, which you will remember involved the payment of money to a certain member of this House, and the reason why we took that action was because, of course, we needed to expose it fast.
Shadow Minister Dunn-Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Biometrics and Surveillance Camera Commissioner said last year that our policing and security services were technologically vulnerable because of their use of Chinese-made equipment, including CCTV, drones and body cameras. So, can the Minister say whether the digital asbestos of Chinese-made technology is still used in our policing and security infrastructure? Yes or no?
Minister.
My honourable friend will know very well that the work of Mr Fraser before he retired last year, or ended his mandate last year, has been absolutely fantastically important to many of us in making sure, and I approve the term digital asbestos, is got out of our institutions. This is something that's ongoing, so it's got out of the most secure sites already, but there are other areas where there is work to do, because of course there were an awful lot of sites, I'm afraid, which bought technology which would now be problematic. Of course, it's not just static sites. There is, of course, the potential that some electric vehicles could be easily turned into mobile intelligence gathering platforms by hostile states, and so it's not simply about looking at the past, but also at the future.
I respect.
Question 4, sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in 2023 we delivered a strong removal performance with overall returns back to pre-COVID levels. In total, 26,000 were returned, an increase of 74% at an average of 500 removed every week last year.
I'm grateful to the Minister's response. Can he update the House on how his department is prioritising the return of foreign national offenders to their home countries to keep the streets and communities of the United Kingdom safe?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, may I firstly pay tribute to my honourable friend and the work that goes on in his constituency, because as he knows, I visited Gatwick recently and saw for myself the good work of the Border Force team were doing there, and he'll be pleased to know that removals of foreign national offenders were up last year by 27%, and that we're committed to the removal of foreign criminals and those with no right to be in the United Kingdom.
Yes, come on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On that point, I sadly see many asylum seekers in Newport who are stuck in limbo due to this government's incompetence. However, can I draw the Minister's attention to the case of a man in Newport who lied about his name and country of origin, is a convicted sex offender who's breached the terms of his licence, and the courts want him returned home. He wants to return home and will even pay for his flight, but for some unfathomable reason, the Home Office seem incapable of allowing or authorising or allowing this, and it's been 3 years. Why?
Well, the removals were increased last year. It's interesting to note that those of the party opposite have campaigned to ensure that they're preventing the deportation of foreign criminals, including the leader of the Labour Party. Those on this side of the House are determined to see foreign criminals removed, and there was an increase in removal of 74% last year.
Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under successive Conservative governments since 2010, returns of failed asylum seekers have collapsed by 44%, and returns of foreign national offenders have fallen by almost 30% over the same period. And for all the government's tough talk, only 2% of those arriving on small boats since 2018 have been returned anywhere, yet ministers are still resisting Labour's plan for a new returns and enforcement unit to ensure the swift removal of those with no right to be here. Meanwhile, more people crossed the channel in small boats over the weekend than will be covered in the entire first year of their failing Rwanda scheme. So will the minister stop the headline-chasing gimmicks and instead commit to setting out what his plan is for the 99% of people who are currently stuck in the asylum system who will never be sent to Rwanda?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that nearly 18,000 foreign national offenders were returned between January 2019 and December 2023. The fact of the matter is members of the party opposite, including the leader of the Labour Party, have campaigned to prevent the deportation of foreign criminals, while those on this side of the House welcome an increase of 74%, an average of 500 people being removed every single week.
Andrew Weston.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm very happy to remind the House that we now have we reached record numbers of police officers last year, in excess of 149,000, over 3,000 more than the previous peak under the last Labour government. And in terms of local policing, we achieved 67,785 as of March last year.
I think the Minister might want to group them.
Mr. Speaker, I always forget that. You're quite right. 8, 15, 16 and 18, with your permission.
OK. Andrew Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under this government, 10,000 neighbourhood police officers have disappeared since 2015 and are yet to be replaced on the front line. Given this government's proclivity for lifting Labour's policies, could I gently encourage the Minister to adopt Labour's plan to recruit 13,000 new neighbourhood police officers, allowing for a named contactable officer in every ward in the country?
Well, the honourable member is using figures which go up to 2019. The reason he's using figures, of course, that are 5 years out of date is the numbers have gone up since then. And if you take neighbourhood policing as a whole, it's gone up from 61,083 in 2015, that's the year he mentioned. It's gone up 61,000 up to 67,785. That's an increase of 6,000. And I'm surprised he's not joining me in welcoming it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Antisocial behaviour has been a big problem in Holyhead. Almost £700,000 of UK government Safer Streets funding has been used for CCTV, improved lighting, self-defence training for local women and girls, delivering crime prevention packs and outreach work. Would the Minister join me in thanking Chief Inspector Robert Rands, PC Lisa Thomas and many others who work so hard to improve the lives of people who live and work in Holyhead?
Well, I would certainly like to join her in thanking those officers and countless thousands of others around the country who do such good work. But on ASB, in addition to the Safer Streets money that my honourable friend mentioned, we are, from the beginning of this month, funding an extra £66 million to do antisocial behaviour hotspot patrolling. Every single one of England and Wales's police forces will get that, and that will make an enormous difference to combating the scourge of ASB.
Paul Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister agree with me that getting extra officers out in our communities should be the top of the list for any PCC? Unfortunately, in Durham, we see the Labour PCC more interested in increasing their back office staff and overseeing a decline in standards, with the latest Peel report showing two areas requiring improvement for the first time ever in Durham. Would he agree with me that the sooner we get an ex-beat cop like the Conservative candidate Rob Potts in place, the sooner Durham will return to being an outstanding police force?
Well, I completely agree with my honourable friend. Spending money on things like flower beds and diversity staff instead of frontline police officers is the wrong priority. And I know that former frontline officers like Rob Potts running for PCC in Durham will do a good job of getting priorities straight.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kusama Akhtar, who is from Oldham, was murdered by her estranged husband on a busy Bradford street in the middle of the day in front of their baby son. Research has repeatedly shown that regular foot patrols, especially in crime hotspots, leads to reduced offending and increased public confidence, particularly if combined with community-based prevention. Greater Manchester Police and West Yorkshire Police want to learn lessons from this tragic murder. What lessons has the Home Secretary learned about reducing neighbourhood policing and the prevalence of appalling crimes like this?
Well, this is obviously a tragic case, and we'll obviously study any findings by the IOPC very, very carefully indeed. She mentioned hotspot patrolling, and I mentioned in my last answer that the government is providing £66 million this financial year on top of the regular police funding settlement to fund hotspot patrolling, which I think may help in situations like these. But just to repeat the point I made previously about the local policing numbers since 2015 have gone up by about 6,500, and selectively quoting figures that are 5 years old does nothing to help public debate.
James Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Halesowen Police Station is under threat of closure from decisions taken by the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands. And Tom Byrne, the Conservative candidate for PCC, has said that he will stop that closure programme. So would the Minister agree with me and Tom Byrne that keeping Halesowen Police Station open is critical for community confidence and for the effectiveness of neighbourhood policing?
Minister.
Yes, I would agree very strongly. The Labour PCC's police station closure plans in the West Midlands are shocking. I note that West Midlands Police this year are getting an extra £50 million. That is a 6.8% increase, well above the rate of inflation. And I think Tom Byrne would do an excellent job making sure that maintains frontline services, which is exactly how that money should be spent.
Mary Glendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Northumbria Force has lost 1,100 officers and £148 million from its budget since 2010, and even after the uplift, Northumbria remains 427 officers short when compared to 2010 levels. Will the Minister support the call by Northumbria's PCC, Kim McGuinness, for further investigation into police resources, as clearly not all areas of the country have benefited equally from the uplift programme?
Minister.
Well, I'm pleased to tell the House that the Northumbria Force, this financial year, the year that started just a couple of weeks ago, their funding is going up by £28 million. That is a 7.6% increase, over double the rate of inflation. So the resources are there. Using those resources wisely is a matter for police and crime commissioners. And, Mr. Speaker, it tends to be Conservative police and crime commissioners who spend those resources most wisely.
Ruth Cadbury.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, sorry, question 7, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, violence and abuse towards shop workers is not and will never be acceptable. Last October, the police published a retail crime action plan. The government has embraced that and enhanced it. Last week, we launched the Fighting Retail Crime Action. Amongst other measures, it includes a commitment to create a new offence of assaulting a retail worker, something the sector has been calling for.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I met a shopkeeper in Hounslow who's been repeatedly targeted by shoplifters. The family who own the family who own the shop can't afford security guards or to lose the large amount of stock, unlike the big chains. It's welcome the government has finally backed Labour's 10-year campaign, along with Usdaw and other campaigners, to introduce a standalone offence of assault against a shop worker. But will the Minister go further and scrap the unfair £200 limit, which leaves offenders getting away with impunity?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it is still a criminal offence, irrespective of the financial value of what is taken. We have made it clear of our commitment to ensure that shopkeepers are protected and that the retail environment is safe. That is why we have put funding in place, which has put more police officers on the streets. That's why, as my right honourable friend has just mentioned, neighbourhood policing numbers are up. That's why we have committed to pursue committed the police to pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry, and that is why I'm very proud that we have put in place a specific criminal offence for assault against a retail worker.
For our high streets to thrive, people need to perceive them as safe places to be, but
there's real concern that the Mayor of London is failing to get the Met to take retail crime seriously enough. So does he agree that we need a new Mayor for London, Susan Hall, to ensure we have more effective policing in our high streets?
Home Secretary.
Quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, the Mayor of London has been a massive disappointment when it has come to the policing of London. It is the only police force in the country which is seeing its police numbers reducing. It has failed to meet its recruitment targets, and quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, Londoners deserve better.
Steve McCabe.
As the chair of the all-party group on retail crime, can I welcome the announcements, as I'm sure shop workers will everywhere? When will they be operationalised, and what's the monitoring process so that we can all judge it's not just words but action?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman makes an important point. We are putting it through as amendments to the Criminal Justice Bill. The quicker that makes its passage through the House, the quicker we can put these specific changes in place. But we're not waiting for that. We've had conversations with police forces to make sure that there is visible policing on our high streets, that they respond to every reasonable line of inquiry, so that they send the signal to the retailers and also to potential criminals that we take this incredibly seriously and that they will respond to this important crime type.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I realise the Home Secretary may be sick of hearing from me about assaults on retail workers, but I welcome the huge and comprehensive package announced last week last week to support these people. And I would like to thank, will my right honourable friend implement these as quickly as possible so as to benefit retail workers across Stockton South and the rest of the country?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to my honourable friend who has campaigned vigorously on this and has met with me on a number of occasions to go through the specifics of these proposals, working closely with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Justice, to make sure that both the policing response and, of course, the criminal response send a very clear deterrent message to those people who might be tempted to assault retail workers. It is not acceptable, and we will take action.
Mr. Farrell-Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in January, the government voted down our latest attempt to introduce a standalone offence tackling violence against retail workers. This continued a pattern of years of failing to address this issue while such violence reached epidemic proportions. And last week, surprise, they U-turned on this, and an offence is now to follow. When are the government going to follow this up by stealing the other ideas they keep denying, a restoration of neighbourhood policing, and actual, not the response officers they've been talking about, proper neighbourhood policing, which is down between 2015 and 2023, and getting rid of the £200 limit.
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, those people in the House should recognise that just because a clause might have a similar sounding name does not mean it is the same. The simple truth of the matter is the clause that the opposition put forward was deficient in many ways. The clause that we have put forward into the Criminal Justice Bill will address the issue. And when it comes to local policing, she should recognise that there has been a 6,000 uplift in local policing.
Question number 9, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, last year we launched the Antisocial Behaviour Action Plan, backed by £160 million worth of funding. Over 100,000 hours of police and other uniform patrols undertaken, targeting ASB hotspots, extended to every single police force in England and Wales. We've banned nitrous oxide, increased the fines for fly tipping, littering and graffiti, and we are strengthening powers to tackle antisocial behaviour through the Criminal Justice Bill making its way through the House.
Justin Madden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the aspects of antisocial behaviour that really annoys my constituents is persistent cannabis smoking from people inside their own homes, particularly in blocks of flats, but not exclusively. However, when I raise this with the police, they tell me that they're not going to go into people's homes and deal with it. I don't think that's good enough. Does the Home Secretary?
Secretary, I think.
Mr. Speaker, the police, and I've had this conversation with police leaders from around the country, the police should take action where there is credible reporting of criminal behaviour. And that is a conversation we will continue to have with police. People need to be safe, but also feel safe in their communities and in their homes.
Sir Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my condolences to you, sir. Protesters who recently created an obnoxious stunt outside the home of the Leader of the Opposition belong in jail, as do the trust fund vandals who caused tens of thousands of pounds worth of damage outside the Ministry of Defence last week. The truth is that frontline politicians of any political hue and our military personnel are prepared to put themselves forward to serve and protect this country, a concept the vandals, of course, would know nothing about. So when it comes to this type of antisocial behaviour, will my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, look at increasing visibility at high-profile locations like those I've discussed?
Secretary.
My right honourable friend raises a couple of points there. Firstly, it is completely unacceptable to try and intimidate parliamentarians of whatever political hue, and I know that I will stand shoulder to shoulder with parliamentarians of whichever political party in defending parliamentarians' right to do and say what they believe to be in the best interest of their countries and their communities without fear of intimidation. That is an absolute red line, and it will be enforced. These petulant acts of vandalism in the name of protests are unacceptable. When criminal damage occurs, that will be pursued, and indeed in the Criminal Justice Bill we're making specific actions to take away this veneer of defence.